Under the cold stars of Zalara, Ethan Cole, the sole survivor of a crashed spaceship, finds himself face to face with an impossible choice. Save three strange women, one a wolf, one a cat, and one a fox, hunted by ruthless enemies, or let them die. But his decision to help sets off an unthinkable chain of events as a mysterious bond forms between them, a telepathic connection that binds their fates together. Now, they must fight not only for survival, but to change the destiny of two worlds on the brink of war. Ready to join Ethan and his unlikely allies on this wild journey? Hit that subscribe button and follow their fight for freedom, survival, and hope in the face of impossible odds. The stars burned cold above Zalara as Ethan Cole's ship screamed through the atmosphere, a dying beast trailing fire and smoke. Alarms blared in the cockpit, red lights flashing like blood pulsing through a wounded heart. He gripped the controls, knuckles white, fighting to steer the wreckage toward a clearing he glimpsed through the viewport, a jagged slash of green amid the alien landscape. The impact came fast, metal crumpled, glass shattered, and the world flipped upside down. When the dust settled, Ethan clawed his way out of the twisted remains, the only survivor of a crew of 12. His breath rasped in his chest, but his mind was sharp, trained by years of instinct and a refusal to die. He wasn't alone for long. Shadows moved beyond the wreckage, low growls cutting through the silence. Three figures emerged, chained and staggering. A wolf woman with piercing amber eyes, a cat woman with a sleek, wary grace, and a fox woman whose gaze held an ancient calm. Their fur shimmered under the faint glow of Zalara's twin moons, but their wrists bore the bite of metal cuffs, prisoners of some unseen captor. Ethan's eyes darted to the horizon as armored silhouettes closed in. Hunters, their weapons glinting with cold intent. He didn't know who these women were or why they were hunted, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't let them die here. No weapons, no backup, just his hands and a mind that never quit. Ethan scrambled to a jagged shard of the ship's hull, its edge sharp enough to cut through bone. With a grunt, he wedged it into the ground near a fallen tree, rigging a crude trap. "Move!" he barked, voice hoarse but firm, shoving the wolf woman toward cover. She snarled, baring fangs, but obeyed. The hunters lunged, and Ethan yanked the vine tied to the shard. It snapped upright, slicing through armor and flesh. One crumpled with a scream, blood pooling beneath him. The second staggered, clutching a gash across his chest, then fell. Ethan darted forward, prying a sleek, humming rifle from the dead hunter's grip. Its weight felt foreign but solid in his hands, a pulse weapon, not Earth-made, but he'd figure out. The third hunter bolted, disappearing into the trees. The wolf woman, Kara, rubbed her wrists, glaring at him with a mix of defiance and disbelief. "You're weak," she growled, voice rough as gravel, "yet you fight like a beast." The catwoman, Silra, tilted her head, eyes narrowing as if peering through him. "A fool or a savior?" she murmured. The foxwoman, Vena, stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "You're not one of us, but you're here for a reason." Before Ethan could respond, a jolt shot through his skull, sharp and electric. Their thoughts flooded in, Kara's fiery pride, Silra's guarded curiosity, Vena's quiet hope. He stumbled, clutching his head. "What the hell?" "Bonding," Vena said, eyes widening. "It's rare. Uncontrolled." Ethan felt it too, a thread tying his mind to theirs, raw and unbreakable. Telepathy. He could hear them, feel them, and they could do the same. Panic surged, but he shoved it down. He'd lost his sister years ago in a war on Earth, a wound that never healed. And this was the first time since then he wasn't alone in his head. Kara flexed her claws, towering over him. "You know, warrior, why risk your life?" Ethan met her gaze, unflinching. "Because I don't leave people behind." His voice cracked, memories of his sister flickering, her laugh, her scream, the silence after. He'd failed her, but not these three. Not today. The moment broke as Silra hissed, ears twitching. "More come." Ethan spun, spotting dust rising in the distance. No time to think. He grabbed a jagged rod from the wreckage, pointing toward a ravine. Run. Now. They moved as one, Kara leading with a predator's stride, Silra darting like a shadow, Venus steady at his side. The hunter's shouts echoed behind, but Ethan's trap had bought them seconds, maybe minutes. Enough to survive. They reached the ravine, sliding down its steep edge into a shallow stream. Water splashed cold against his legs, but Ethan barely noticed. He turned to Kara, who'd stopped to scan the ridge above. Keep moving, he urged, stepping closer to nudge her forward. His hand brushed her waist. Muscle taut under fur, a curve that spoke of strength and wildness. Through the bond, her breath flared like a fire catching wind, fierce and untamed. He froze, heat rising in his chest, but she jerked away, eyes blazing. Don't touch me, human, she snapped, though her voice wavered. Ethan pulled back, jaw tight, hiding the jolt that shot through him. Silra smirked from a nearby rock, tail flicking. He's bold for a soft skin. Venus said nothing, but her gaze lingered on Ethan, a quiet weight in it. The bond buzzed with their emotions. Kara's anger masking something deeper, Silra's amusement laced with doubt, Vena's calm tinged with wonder. Ethan shook his head, forcing focus. Who were those hunters? Why you? Vena answered, voice low. We're Amazons, last of our kind. A virus killed our males 30,000 years ago. They hunt us for trophies. She paused, studying him. You're different. No male of your species has bonded with us before. Ethan frowned, processing. So I'm stuck with you three in my head? Kara snorted. You'll live. Maybe. Footsteps thudded above. More hunters closing in. Ethan gripped the rod tighter, adrenaline surging. Then we fight or we run. Your call. Kara bared her teeth in a grin. Fight. Silra nodded, claws unsheathing. Vena touched his arm, a fleeting warmth. Together, Ethan didn't hesitate. He spotted a choke point in the ravine, narrow, defensible. There, he said, pointing. We hold him off. He wasn't a soldier, just a pilot with a stubborn streak, but he learned one thing from Earth's wars. Humans don't break easy. As the hunters descended, he planted his feet, rod raised. Kara lunged first, a blur of fangs and fury. Silra struck from the shadows, silent and lethal. Vena stayed near Ethan, her presence steadying him. The clash was brutal but quick. Ethan swung the rod, cracking a hunter's helm. Kara tore, threw another, Silra down to third. The last fled, blood trailing behind. Panting, Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, the bond pulsing with their shared rush. Kara's triumph, Silra's cool satisfaction, Vena's relief. He met their eyes, chest heaving. We're not done yet, are we? Vena shook her head. This is only the beginning. Ethan straightened, resolve hardening. Whatever this planet threw at him, he'd face it, not just for survival, but for them. Humanity didn't bow, didn't break, and neither would he. Ethan's boots sank into the damp soil as the group pushed deeper into Zalara's wilds, the ravine's echoes fading behind them. The twin moons hung low, casting jagged shadows through the canopy. Kara led the way, her stride fierce and unyielding, while Silra flanked them, eyes darting to every rustle. Vena stayed close to Ethan, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm of their shared thoughts. The bond hummed, Kara's restless energy, Silra's sharp caution, Vena's steady calm. Ethan's head throbbed from it, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. He wasn't about to let this telepathy, or anything else, break him. Kara stopped abruptly, claws flexing. You're slow, human, she growled, turning to face him. Prove you're worth keeping around. Her amber eyes glinted with challenge. Ethan squared his shoulders, meeting her stare. I don't need claws to fight. She smirked, dropping into a crouch. Show me. Before he could blink, she lunged, a blur of fangs. Ethan dodged, reflexes honed from cockpit drills, and swung the rifles but low. Kara leaped over it, but he'd planned that. Twisting, he kicked dirt into her path. She landed, coughing, and he pinned her arm with the barrel. Brains over brawn, he panted. Kara wrenched free, snarling, but respect flickered through the bond. Clever, she muttered, shaking off dust. For his soft skin. Silra watched from a perch above, tail flicking. He's not just meat, she said, voice cool. What else hides in that head of yours? Ethan felt her probing through the bond, a sharp tug at his memories. He pushed back, focusing on a moment from Earth, repairing a crashed shuttle with nothing but scrap and grit, hands bleeding as he refused to quit. Silra's eyes widened slightly. You're stubborn, she said. Like us. Vena stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. He's more than that. She met Ethan's gaze, and a memory of his sister flashed, her laugh before the bombs fell. Vena's thoughts brushed his, soft but piercing. You carry loss, yet you fight. That's why you're here. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding. I don't give up. Not then, not now. Their moment shattered as a roar split the air. The air split with a guttural roar as a six-legged beast erupted from the undergrowth, spines glinting like blades. It charged Silra, who twisted aside, claws slashing its flank. But the creature was faster. Its massive paw slammed her down, pinning her against the dirt. Ethan's heart stopped. Time fractured, and he saw her, his sister, small and fragile, screaming as fire rained from the sky on Earth. He'd been too late then, hands empty, voice lost in the chaos. Not now. Not again, he bellowed, the words tearing from his throat. His rifle fired a pulse, grazing the beast, but it wasn't enough. A rock trembled at his feet, then shot upward, propelled by a force he didn't understand. It smashed into the creature's skull, cracking bone. The beast reared, and Ethan's gut twisted. A surge of raw will erupted from him. Another stone, bigger, flew like a cannonball, slamming the monster back 10 meters into a tree with a sickening crunch. It collapsed lifeless. Silra staggered up, blood streaking her fur, eyes wide. What was that? Her voice shook, but her gaze locked on him, searching. Ethan's hands trembled, adrenaline and exhaustion warring in his veins. Telekinesis, Vena answered, stepping closer, threading her words. The bond, it's you. Ethan stared at the fallen beast, then at his shaking fingers. This wasn't just a tool. It was him, forged from the pain he'd buried, now clawing free. Silra wiped blood from her cheek, stepping nearer. You're more than I thought, she said, her tone steady but her eyes lingering through the bond. A flicker of trust, new and fragile. Ethan met her look, chest heaving. Good, because I'm not losing anyone else. The bond pulsed, and for the first time, he felt it. Her faith in him, faint but growing. That night, they camped by a steaming spring, its heat a stark contrast to the cool air. Ethan sat apart, testing his new power, lifting pebbles, then a stick, each effort sharpening his control. Vena approached, kneeling beside him. It's tied to us, she said. The stronger we connect, the stronger you become. Ethan glanced at her, the bond pulsing with her warmth. Then we'd better stick together. She nodded, dipping her hand into the spring. Ethan followed, their fingers brushing underwater. A spark raced through him, and their eyes locked. He leaned in, drawn by something deeper than words, and his lips met hers, a fleeting press, soft but electric. The world blurred as the bond flared, her thoughts opening like a wild garden, untamed and alive. Steam thickened around them, the spring's rhythm matching their quickening breaths. Time slipped away, and when it cleared, they lay side by side under a tree, the air heavy with what passed unspoken. Kara's sharp intake of breath cut through the bond from across the camp, Silra's curiosity prickling like static. Neither spoke, but Ethan felt their eyes on him, a tension he couldn't shake. He stood, brushing off the moment, but it lingered, Vena's closeness igniting a protective edge he hadn't noticed before. When Silra sparred with Kara later, a stray Amazon scout watching from the shadows, Ethan's chest tightened. He stepped between them, glaring at the intruder. They're not yours to eye, he snapped. Kara raised a brow. Possessive now, are we? He clenched his fists, fighting the urge. Just keeping us safe. Days later, a skirmish tested that resolve. A pack of spined beasts ambushed them near a frozen ridge. Silra took a claw to the side, blood staining her fur. Ethan roared, shoving past Kara to reach her. His hands pressed her wound, fingers brushing the delicate line above her collarbone as he tore cloth to bind it. Her pulse raced through the bond, a storm of pain and something else, sharp, fleeting. "Hold still," he muttered, ignoring the heat in his face. She hissed, but didn't pull away. He turned, lifting a boulder with his mind and hurling it at the pack, scattering them. Kara finished the last with a snarl, then shot him a look. Getting stronger. Back at camp, Vena sat him down, her voice urgent. "There's more." She hesitated, then pressed a hand to her stomach. "I'm carrying sons, your sons." Ethan froze, the bond flooding with her fear and wonder. "Sons? How?" She explained. "A virus wiped out Amazon males millennia ago. Their healers crafting a substance to mate with other species, but never humans, until now. You've changed us," she said. "The bond did this." Ethan's mind raced. "Then they'll come for me." Vena nodded. "They already are." Carapace claws out. "Let them try." Silra's tail lashed. "We're not prey." Ethan stood, resolve hardening. "Neither am I." Next dawn, the warband of Amazons emerged from the trees, a scarred leader at their helm, her voice a guttural command. "The human, surrender him, or we take him." Kara bared her fangs, stepping forward. "He's ours." Ethan shoved past, rifle raised, eyes hard. "I don't belong to anyone." "Back off." The leader laughed, a harsh bark, and waved her warriors in. "Prove it." Chaos erupted. Ethan fired pulses from the rifle, tearing through armor, while rocks whirled around him, a telekinetic shield. Kara charged, claws rending flesh. Silra struck from the shadows, silent and deadly. Vena stayed near, her presence steadying him. Then the leader moved, fast, brutal, drawing a bow and loosing an energy arrow straight at Vena's chest. Ethan saw it in a flash, her death playing out in his mind. "No!" he roared, lunging forward. His hand shot out, and the arrow froze midair, inches from her, its glow flickering against his will. The effort hit like a hammer, his vision blurred, blood trickling from his nose as he pushed harder, flinging the arrow aside. It exploded against a tree, and Ethan crumpled, gasping. The leader snarled, advancing, but Kara and Silra were there. Kara slashing her arm, Silra tackling her legs. Through the bond, their thoughts crashed into him. "I won't lose you." A shared vow, fierce and unyielding. The warband faltered, their leader staggering back, bloodied. "Your kind will pay for this," she spat, retreating with her survivors. Ethan forced himself up, legs shaking, pain searing his ribs. He gripped the rifle, voice raw but firm. "They'll have to kill me first." Kara wiped gore from her claws, nodding. "Let them try." Silra steadied him, her touch brief but solid. Vena's hand found his, her eyes fierce with gratitude. The bond thrummed. Kara's fire, Silra's steel, Vena's resolve, all tied to him. They weren't just a group anymore. They were his to protect, and he'd die before letting them fall. The warband's retreat left a jagged silence, their leader's bloodied glare burning into Ethan's mind as she vanished into the trees. He wiped the trickle of blood from his nose, the ache in his ribs a dull roar, but his grip on the rifle stayed firm. Kara paced beside him, claws twitching, her fury a molten thread through the bond. Silra crouched near a fallen foe, stripping a blade from its hand, her silence sharp as ever. Vena stood close, her fingers brushing his wrist, a quiet lifeline amid the chaos. The bond pulsed with their shared defiance, but Ethan felt the weight of what was coming. Vena's sons, his sons, changed everything. "They'll be back," he said, voice rough. "More of them." Kara bared her teeth, a feral grin. "Let them come. I'll rip them apart." Silra's eyes flicked to the horizon. "It's not just her now." Word spreading. Vena nodded, her hand resting on her stomach. "Sons." something they've dreamed of for 30,000 years. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we don't wait here like prey. We move. They trekked fast, cutting through tangled undergrowth until they reached a rocky outcrop. A defensible ridge with a steep drop on one side and a narrow path up the other. Ethan scanned the terrain, mind racing. "This'll do," he said, slinging the rifle off his shoulder. "We hold the high ground." He pointed to a pile of loose stones nearby. "Kara, Silra, help me rig these." Kara snorted but complied, hauling rocks while Silra scouted for vines. Ethan worked fast, weaving the vines into tripwires tied to the stones. A crude avalanche trap. Vena gathered sharp sticks, stacking them near the edge. "For when they get close," she said, her voice steady despite the fear he felt through the bond. By dusk, the whispers hit them, distant voices carried on the wind, growing into a chorus. Through the bond, Ethan caught fragments, the human breed's sons. Firebringer, outsider filth. Amazons from every corner of Zalara were converging, their thoughts a chaotic swarm. Some hailed him as a savior, a breaker of their ancient curse. Others saw a threat, a human whose blood could topple their world. He pressed a hand to his temple, the noise clawing at his skull. "They're coming," he muttered. "All of them." Night fell, and with it the storm. Shadows flooded the ridge's base. Dozens of Amazons, wolf and cat and fox, armed with spears, blades, and flickering energy staffs. Their eyes glowed in the dark, a sea of hunger and rage. Ethan triggered the traps, yanking a vine. Stones tumbled, crashing down the slope, smashing through armor and bone. Screams erupted as a handful fell, but the rest pressed on, undeterred. He fired the rifle, pulses slicing through the night, each shot a burst of defiance. Kara leaped into the fray, claws rending flesh, her roar a challenge to the stars. Silra darted along the ridge, striking from above, a shadow with lethal precision. Vena hurled her sticks, aiming for gaps in the line. Ethan pushed his telekinesis, lifting rocks and flinging them into the crowd. A spear grazed his thigh, tearing cloth and skin, but he gritted his teeth and kept fighting. The rifle's hum steadied him. Half charge left, enough to hold. But the numbers swelled, warriors scaling the ridge, their snarls closing in. A fox warrior lunged at Vena, blade flashing. Ethan fired, dropping her mid-step, but another took her place, then another. His vision blurred, sweat mixing with blood. "Fall back," he shouted, shoving Vena toward the ridge's crest. Kara growled, dragging a foe down as she retreated. Silra slipped behind, claws dripping. The Amazons bottlenecked at the narrow path, regrouping, their breaths heaving in the dark. Ethan slumped against a boulder, chest burning. "We can't hold forever," Silra said, wiping blood from her face. He checked the rifle, its glow dimming. "We don't have to, just long enough." Kara kicked a broken spear aside. "Long enough for what? They'll bury us." Vena's eyes met his, fierce. "You're more than they think. Show them." Ethan nodded, catching her drift. He staggered to the ridge's edge, voice cutting through the wind. "You want me? I'm here, but I'm not your enemy." Through the bond, he pushed an image. Vena's sons, strong and alive, a future for their kind. The attackers hesitated, some lowering weapons, others snarling. A wolf warrior stepped forward, spear raised. "Prove it, human, or bleed." Ethan leveled the rifle. "Try me." The fight reignited, but slower, doubt rippling through their ranks. Ethan fired to disarm, telekinesis yanking spears from hands. Kara and Silra followed his lead, striking to wound, not kill. Vena whispered names, tribal leaders she knew, guiding him to sway them. It worked barely. A third of the warband broke off, retreating into the night, muttering of a firebringer. The rest doubled down, their fury a wall of steel and claws. Hours bled into dawn, and the attackers pulled back, leaving bodies strewn across the slope. Ethan collapsed against the boulder, rifle slipping from his grip. "We're alive," he rasped, blood seeping from his thigh. Kara crouched beside him, her breath ragged. "For now, She gripped his shoulder, hauling him up, and his hand brushed her hip. A jolt of wild energy surging through the bond, fierce and untamed. She froze, eyes flashing, then tightened her hold. "Don't die on me, human," she growled, voice low. He forced a grin, pain lancing through him. "Not planning to." Silra scanned the horizon, tail still. "They'll regroup. Bigger next time." Vena knelt beside him, her touch soft but firm. "You gave them doubt. That's a start." Ethan leaned into her, exhaustion pulling at him. "A start," he echoed. "But it's not enough." The bond thrummed with their resolve, but he felt the storm brewing. Zalara wouldn't stop, not until it claimed him or broke trying. The dawn light barely pierced the haze as Ethan slumped against the boulder, blood seeping from his thigh, the rifle's glow dim in his hands. Kara's grip lingered on his shoulder, her claws twitching as she scanned the slope littered with bodies. Silra stood at the ridge's edge, her silhouette taut against the rising sun, eyes fixed on the retreating shadows. Vena knelt beside him, her fingers pressing a cloth to his wound, her calm a lifeline through the bond. But the silence was a lie. Ethan felt it in his bones, a storm brewing beyond the horizon. "They're not done," he rasped, voice raw. "Not by a long shot." Sil returned, her tail flicking. "Scouts are moving. Hundreds more, massing fast." Kara cracked her knuckles, a low growl rumbling. "Good. I'm not finished either." Vena's eyes met Ethan's, shadowed but fierce. "They want you alive, Ethan. That's our leverage." He nodded, forcing himself up despite the pain lancing through his leg. "Then we use it. Hit them hard, then talk." "We don't have much time." They scrambled to prepare. Ethan rigged more traps, sharpened branches tied to vines, poised to drop from the ridge's lip. Kara hauled stones, stacking them into a crude barricade across the narrow path. Silra scouted below, returning with a stolen energy blade, its hum faint but deadly. "They're bringing elders now," she reported. "Healers too. This isn't just war, it's judgment." Vena handed Ethan a paste of crushed herbs, her hand steady. "For the pain," she said. He smeared it on his thigh, the sting fading to a dull throb. "Thanks. Let's make it count." Dusk fell like a hammer, and with it came the tide. Hundreds of Amazons surged up the ridge, warriors in front, elders and healers behind, a coalition of fur and steel. Their chants shook the air, a mix of reverence and rage. Ethan yanked a vine, dropping branches that speared through the front line, screams cutting through the dusk. He fired the rifle, pulses tearing into armor, while telekinesis hurled rocks down the slope. Kara leaped over the barricade, claws slashing, her roar a defiance of the odds. Silra struck from above, blade flashing, carving a path through the chaos. Vena stayed back, flinging stones when gaps opened, her aim deadly. But the numbers crushed them. Warriors breached the barricade, forcing the group back toward the ridge's crest. Ethan took a staff to the arm, the crack of bone sending a jolt of pain through him. He fired back, the rifle's charge flickering, nearly spent. A wolf warrior lunged, pinning him against the rock. He slammed her off with a telekinetic shove, gasping as blood welled from a fresh gash on his side. Kara hauled him up, her strength unrelenting. "Stay alive, damn it," she snarled, shoving him behind her. Silra downed the attacker, then spun to face the tide. Too many. Ethan's vision blurred, but he spotted her, the scarred leader from before, barking orders from the rear. "Her!" he shouted, pointing. Kara charged, Silra flanking, but the leader dodged, her spear countering with brutal precision. Ethan staggered forward, lifting a jagged slab with his mind. It crashed near her, forcing her back. "Enough!" he roared, voice breaking through the din. "You want me? Talk." The leader raised a hand, halting her warriors. The air stilled, breaths heaving, weapons poised. "Speak, human," she growled, stepping forward, her scar glinting in the faint light. Ethan leaned on the rifle, blood dripping onto the stone. "You're losing fighters. For what?" "I'm not here to destroy you." Through the bond, he pushed an image, Vena's sons, strong and alive. A future for Zalara. This is what you've waited for. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. An elder hobbled forward, staff tapping the ground. The prophecy speaks of rebirth. Is this it? The leader spat, spears still raised. Or ruin. He's human, weak, treacherous. Ethan straightened, defiance flaring despite the pain. Weak? I'm still here. You're bleeding just as much. She sneered. Your sons mean nothing without more. We need men, your men, or this ends now. Ethan's gut twisted, the bond flooding with her demand. He saw it. Earth soldiers, prisoners, anyone they could take, reduced to tools for their survival. Rage surged, memories of his sister's death mingling with faces he'd known. Comrades left to rot after war. You don't get to trade flesh, he snapped. Not like that. The elder tilted her head. Then what, Firebringer? You offer nothing. Ethan's mind raced, pain sharpening his focus. He couldn't give them Earth's unwilling, but there was another way, a better one. Not nothing, he said, voice steadying. Partners. Men who choose this. Soldiers forgotten in broken hospitals. Courage left to waste. They're not tools. They're equals. The leader laughed, harsh and bitter. Cripples? Useless husks. Ethan's eyes blazed. No. Jack Malone lost his legs in a war, taught me to fly with nothing but grit. Died alone in a ward, smiling at a sky he'd never touch again. Thousands like him, alive, waiting for purpose. Give them that, and you get sons. Through the bond, he pushed Jack's memory, his last crooked grin, hands rough but steady as he handed Ethan a wrench. Then a vision, veterans standing tall on Zalara, laughing with Amazon children in open fields, scars worn like badges. The elder's staff stilled, her gaze piercing. Equals. Ethan nodded, firm. Yes, they come willing or not at all. The leader's spear wavered, doubt creeping into her stance. And if your kind refuses? Ethan's jaw clenched. They won't. I'll make them see. He turned to the group, voice low. We hold until they do. Kara stepped closer, claws gleaming. You talk too much, human. Her tone was sharp, but the bond carried a flicker of approval. Silra wiped blood from her blade, steadying him with a glance. It's a gamble. Vena's hand found his, her resolve a quiet fire. One worth taking. The leader lowered her spear just an inch. Prove it, she said, voice cold. Or we take you anyway. She signaled her warriors back, a tense retreat, leaving the ridge scarred and silent. Ethan sank to his knees, blood pooling beneath him, the rifle clattering to the stone. We've got time, he breathed, exhaustion pulling him under. Not much, but enough. The bond thrummed, Kara's grudging respect, Silra's cautious hope, Vena's unyielding faith. They bought a chance, but the storm wasn't over. Earth would come, and with it, the real test. The truce clung to the ridge like a threadbare shroud. 3 days of uneasy, quiet fraying at the edges. Ethan's wounds ached beneath the herb paste, his thighs stiff and his side raw, but he forced himself upright, rifle cradled in his lap, its charge a dying flicker. Kara paced nearby, claws tapping stone, her restlessness a jagged pulse through the bond. Silra perched on the ridge's lip, sharpening the stolen energy blade, her gaze fixed outward. Vena sat beside him, her hand a steady warmth on his arm, her strength anchoring the bond's hum. Kara's fire, Silra's steel, her own quiet resolve. They'd clawed out a reprieve, but Ethan knew it wouldn't hold. Silra tensed, blade pausing. They're here, she said, voice cutting the silence. Ethan hauled himself up, pain stabbing his leg, and peered over the edge. Dust swelled in the distance. Hundreds of Amazons advancing, deliberate and slow. Then a deeper hum split the air. Earth's ships descending, their hulls catching the twin moon's glow. His stomach dropped. Both sides, he muttered. Right on time. Kara bared her fangs. Let them tear each other apart. Vena shook her head, firm. They won't. They're here for us. Ethan tightened his grip on the rifle. Then we make them hear us. One last stand. He turned to the group. Gear up. This ends now. The Amazons reached the ridge first, led by the scarred wolf warrior and the elder, their coalition sprawling, warriors in front, healers and tribal leaders behind, weapons lowered but poised. The elder stepped forward, staff striking the ground. "You promise proof? Human," she said, voice ringing. "Deliver, or this ends in blood." Before Ethan could answer, a horn blared. Earth ships touched down, spilling soldiers in heavy gear. A general marched out, calm crackling. "Cole, you're finished. Surrender, or we flatten this rock." Ethan stood caught between two storms, blood crusting his sleeve. He raised a hand, stalling them. "No one dies today," he shouted, rough but unwavering. "Not unless you make it happen." The leader smirked. Bold for a man half dead. The general snapped, "Stand down, Cole. You've lost it." Ethan shot back. "I found it. You're the ones blind." The elder lifted her staff. "Talk ends here. We meet." She pointed to a flat clearing below, a neutral stage. Ethan nodded, glancing at his group. "Stay close. This is it." Kara growled but followed, Silra silent at his side, Vena a step behind. They descended, facing Amazon leaders and Earth soldiers in a circle crackling with tension. The bond buzzed, Kara's itch to fight, Silra's cold focus, Vena's fragile hope. The elder spoke first. "You offered equals, not slaves. Where's your proof?" The general cut in, harsh. "We're not giving up men. This is extraction, not a deal." Ethan stepped forward, blood staining the dirt. "It's not a deal. It's a future. For both." He faced the Amazons. "You need sons. Earth has men who've lost everything but their fight. They're not done. They're ready." To the general, "You've got soldiers wasting away, forgotten. Give them a reason to live, not a grave." The leader sneered. "Your broken scraps won't save us." Ethan's eyes flared. "They're not scraps. They're survivors. Men who faced worse than you and stood up." The general's voice hardened. "They're relics, Cole. War chew them up." Ethan's tone sharpened, cutting through. "War didn't break them. It forged them. That's strength you can't match." The air thickened, words hanging heavy, when a shadow darted. A cloaked fox warrior broke from the ranks, bow drawn, an energy arrow streaking toward Vena's chest. Ethan saw it in a flash. Her fall, his failure, everything gone. "No!" he roared, throwing himself in front. His hand shot out, the arrow halting inches from her, its glow trembling against his will. Pain slammed him, blood streamed from his nose, his knees buckled, but he held it, shaking. Kara lunged, claws sinking into the assassin's arm, wrenching her down. Silra struck, blade shattering the bow. Vena grabbed Ethan, her strength surging through the bond. Their minds fused, his telekinesis erupted, not just stopping the arrow, but blasting it into fragments. Rocks rose, spinning in a furious storm, fueled by Kara's rage, Silra's precision, Vena's will. The assassin stumbled back, terror in her eyes, as the ground quaked. Ethan's voice thundered, unbroken. "You don't touch her." The Amazons recoiled, warriors retreating a step, the elder's staff faltering. The general's soldiers gripped their weapons, frozen. Ethan's defiance, his raw refusal to yield, pinned them all. Kara held the assassin down, claws poised. "Who?" Ethan demanded, staggering forward, Vena at his side. The fox warrior coughed blood. "Those who'd rather die than bow." The elder raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "She's alone." Her gaze pierced Ethan. "You shield what's yours. But can you fulfill your words?" He straightened, pain clawing his ribs. "Yes. Men who choose this. Veterans ready to build a life, not just give one." He pushed through the bond. Not Jack this time, but a memory of a ward on Earth. A soldier with one arm, carving a toy for a child he'd never see, defiance in his eyes despite the ruin. Then a vision, scarred hands lifting Amazon sons, fields alive with laughter under Zalara's sky. "This is what we forged together." The general's calm hissed, his voice tight. "You're dreaming, Cole. They'll never take it." Ethan turned, unbowed. "They will. Because it's real." He faced the elder. "Equal terms. They come willing or not all. You stand with them, not over them." The leader's spear wavered, her glare softening. "And if Earth fails us?" Ethan met her eyes. "You've got me. Until it's done." A taut silence stretched. The elder nodded, deliberate. "Partners." The leader grunted, spear dropping. "Prove it." Ethan faced the general, blood pooling at his feet. "Send volunteers. No chains. We build, not break." The general's jaw clenched. Then he muttered into the comm, "Hold fire. Prep the list." The ships hummed, a tense stillness settling. Vena's gasp broke it. She doubled over, clutching her stomach. Ethan caught her, panic spiking. "Now!" She nodded, breathless. "Now!" Kara and Silra closed in, shielding them as healers rushed forward, hands swift. Time warped, cries, chaos. The bond flooding with Vena's pain and Ethan's dread. Then a wail cut through. A son, born in Zalara's dust, small but fierce. Ethan took the boy, hands shaking, his tiny eyes amber and sharp. A thread brushed his mind, telepathy pure and new. "He's ours," Vena whispered, leaning into him, spent but alive. Ethan held him tight, a swell in his chest. "He's us." The Amazons lowered their weapons fully, murmurs rising. The elder's voice carried. "A sign." The general turned away, barking into the comm, "Get it done, Cole." Ethan sank to his knees, cradling his son, Vena beside him. Kara smirked, claws easing. Still soft. Silra's blade clicked off. But enough. The bond sang, Kara's fire tempered, Silra's trust forged, Vena's love unbreakable. Ethan looked at his son, then the stars. He'd faced death, bent two worlds in one. Humanity didn't just endure, it shaped. And he'd see it rise. The dust settled over the ridge, the hum of Earth's ships fading as they lifted off, leaving only the echo of their engines and a promise hanging in the air. Ethan sat on the hard ground, his son cradled in his arms, the boy's tiny chest rising and falling with a rhythm that felt like victory. Vena leaned against him, her breath steady now, her strength a quiet fire through the bond. Kara stood a few paces away, claws retracted, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the Amazons had withdrawn. Silra crouched nearby, energy blades silent in her hand, her eyes softer than Ethan had ever seen. The bond thrummed, a harmony forged in blood and will, Kara's fire tempered, Silra's trust solid, Vena's love a bedrock. He looked down at his son, amber eyes blinking up at him, a faint thread of telepathy brushing his mind, raw, new, alive. "He's strong," Ethan murmured, voice rough from exhaustion. Vena's hand found his, squeezing gently. Like his father, he managed a tired smile, the weight of the past days pressing down, but lighter now shared. The elder approached, staff tapping the earth, her presence a shadow of authority. "A sign," she said again, nodding at the child. "You've proven your words, human. The tribes will honor this, partners, not masters." Her gaze shifted to the sky, where the ships had vanished. "If your kind keeps faith." Ethan met her eyes, firm despite the ache in his bones. "They will. I'll make sure of it." Kara snorted, kicking a stone aside. "You talk too much for soft skin." But her tone carried a grudging warmth, and through the bond, he felt it. Respect, hard-won and real. Silra stood, sheathing her blade. "He's more than talk now." She glanced at the boy, a rare flicker of something gentle crossing her face. "Enough to change us." The Amazons dispersed, their coalition breaking into smaller groups, some lingering to watch Ethan with wary awe, others vanishing into Zalara's wilds. Word spread fast, tales of the Firebringer, the human who defied death and birthed hope. Earth soldiers had left behind a comm relay, its signal blinking, a lifeline to the volunteers Ethan had demanded. He knew the general's hesitation, the bureaucracy that would slow it, but he'd seen the spark in that man's eyes, doubt turning to possibility. It would happen. It had to. Days bled into weeks. The ridge abandoned for a valley where water ran clear and the air smelled of growth. Ethan's wound scarred over, his limp fading as he worked alongside the Amazons, building shelters, not walls. The first volunteers arrived, 10 men, weathered and worn, stepping off a shuttle with eyes that held both loss and hunger. One, a grizzled soldier with a prosthetic arm, clasped Ethan's hand. "Heard you made a deal," he rasped. "Worth a shot." Ethan nodded, throat tight. "More than a shot. A life." The Amazons met them, not with spears, but with cautious hands, testing this strange alliance. Kara took to sparring with the newcomers, her laughter sharp as she knocked them down, only to haul them up again. Silra watched, guiding them through Zalara's dangers with a patience Ethan hadn't expected. Vena moved among them, her son strapped to her chest, her quiet words bridging gaps no one else could. Ethan saw it, the first threads of something new, fragile but real. He stood one evening on a rise, overlooking the valley, the twin moons casting long shadows. His son, now named Kale by Vena's tradition, gurgled in his arms, tiny fingers grasping at the air. The bond flickered, Kale's mind reaching out, a spark of connection tying him to Ethan, to Vena, to the others. Below, a veteran with a scarred face knelt beside an Amazon healer, showing her how to mend a tool with steady hands. Laughter drifted up, Kara's, rough and free, mingled with a soldier's hoarse chuckle. Ethan's chest swelled, a quiet pride he hadn't felt since Earth. He'd come here broken, a pilot with nothing but grit and guilt. Now he was more, guardian, father, a bridge between worlds. The possessive edge he'd wrestled with, that raw need to claim and shield, had shifted. It wasn't about owning them, it was about standing with them for them. He'd learned to temper it, to let them fight beside him, not behind. Vena joined him, her presence a warmth at his side. "You've changed us," she said, echoing words from before, but heavier now. "All of us." He glanced at her, then at Kale. "You changed me first." She smiled, rare and bright, and through the bond, he felt her faith, unshaken, boundless. The comm relay crackled one morning, the general's voice cutting through static. "Cole, you've got your damn volunteers. 50 more inbound. Don't screw this up." Ethan grinned, replying, "Wouldn't dream of it." The ships came, disgorging men who'd seen wars end and found nothing waiting. Until now. The valley grew, shelters rising, fields taking shape. Children followed, Kale the first, then others born of Amazon and human, their cries a new song under Zalara's sky. Months turned to a year, and Ethan stood again on that rise, Kale toddling at his feet, chasing a stone with clumsy steps. Below, the valley thrived, veterans and Amazons working side by side, their voices a blend of Earth's grit and Zalara's wildness. A girl with fox ears darted past, laughing as a soldier with a cane chased her, pretending to stumble. Kara wrestled a boy twice her size, grinning as he fought back. Silra sat with a group, teaching them to track, her patience a steady thread. Ethan knelt, lifting Kale into his arms. The boy's mind brushed his stronger now, a clear echo of his own. "You'll see it all," he whispered, holding him close. "What we made." Vena stood beside him, her hand slipping into his. "What you made," she corrected, her voice soft but sure. He shook his head. "Us. All of us." He looked out, the valley a patchwork of scars and growth, a fragile piece stitched together by will and sweat. Zalara called him the Unbroken, a title whispered in their camps, carried on their winds. Earth sent messages now, not threats, requests for reports, hints of pride. He'd become a symbol, a human who didn't just survive, but reshaped a galaxy's edge. Pride flared deep and steady. Humanity hadn't just endured, it had reached, built, changed. Ethan had lost his sister, his crew, his old life. But here, he'd found something greater, a legacy in Kale's eyes, in the hands of men who'd been forgotten, in the trust of a world that once hunted him. He'd fought for it, bled for it, and won. The twin moons rose, bathing the valley in silver. Kale yawned, nestling against him, and Ethan held him tighter, Vena's warmth at his side. Kara's laugh rang out below, Silra's voice joining it. A sound of life, unbroken. He looked to the stars, a quiet vow settling in his chest. This was just the beginning. and he'd see it through.